Good evening. You've reached the dark side of the mountain. Welcome to South Side Paranormal with your host, DJ Nemo, bringing you top tier investigations. We look at things through history, through time. We look at mysterious hauntings, mysterious creatures, and things that go bump in the night. So strap yourselves in, open up your minds, and question everything. Good evening. You are tuned into Southside Paranormal with your host, DJ Nemo. That's me. Welcome, fans, subscribers. Welcome to the official start of season 3. I know it's been a long time. We threw out the teaser last Friday, but we are dropping brand new content for you this evening. So if this is your first time listening, thank you. We appreciate you being here. We also appreciate your love and support. We ask that you, if you are a friend of this podcast, that you like, share, and subscribe, and pass this podcast on to friends, family that might be interested in the weird, cryptids, hauntings, paranormal, anything out there, unexplained phenomena. We talk about it on this podcast, which brings us to season 3. And I said season 3 was going to be a straight up banger. And we are starting it off with a super crazy topic that not a lot of people know about. Okay. When we talk about cryptid type creatures, we're investigating creatures of the unknown. However, when we think of that, most people think of Bigfoot. That's the obvious. Chupacabra, which we are going to talk about in season 3. Dogman, we talked a little bit about that in season 1. We get into a lot of different topics here on this show. Loch Ness Monster. Okay. But when I bring up this next cryptid, only the true hardcore people know who this guy is. And that is Lizard Man. Now, when we say Lizard Man, we're not talking about a specific lizard man, because there are multiple sightings of lizard type creatures and entities all throughout America. Okay, we're talking from the West Coast, California. We're going to talk about a specific case here in Arizona, because we know that we are the dark side of the mountain, and we broadcast from the South Mountain side to drop out that knowledge to all the people in the community. But we also have lizard sightings throughout the South, through the East, basically even worldwide. And if you really want to look into the phenomena, I mean, there are people seeing lizard type entities, lizard type creatures, which goes down a whole different rabbit hole. But what is this lizard type creature? So there's different versions of what people see. Okay. And we'll go over all the different types. But we're going to start off with the original most famous case. And that deals with the original lizard man, the one we see, we call Scape or Swamp in Bishopville, South Carolina. So this story takes place in 1988. There might have been other lizard sightings previous to that. We'll talk about the LA case specifically, because that goes down a whole different ball game. But as for documented news people with evidence, you have to start at Bishopville. So basically, Bishopville is in South Carolina. This is the rural part of South Carolina, small town. and it's swampy there. So it's thick, it's wooded, it's swampy. Not a lot of people go out there. All there is in the swamp are snakes and gators, and most people don't want to get bit by a snake or a gator, so most people stay out of the swamp. And this is what lends the credence to the theory that maybe a creature like this could exist in something like that, in a habitat like that, where it's eating other creatures and other cryptids and other stuff like that out there. So it starts in June 29th, 1988. There's a young boy. I don't have a specific name. I'd have to look it up. But basically, he was driving home from work on the late shift. He was, teenager, I believe, in high school. He was a senior, and he was working at like a delivery job. And, sometimes the pizza delivery jobs, you get taken into the late night shifts. And that's where this kid was at. So he was just finished his shift, dropped off his last pizza, and the boss was like, yeah, man, just go on home. So he blows a tire out along Scape or Swamp. And he was like, oh man, this is just what I need at 2 a.m, right? So he gets out, but this is a small town, so it's safe. You're not worried about, being attacked by violent crime, not in Bishopville. Okay. So he gets out of the car to change the tire, and he hears a sound like running. And it sounds like someone running, and it gets getting louder and louder and louder. And what emerges out of the darkness is a lizard man. Okay. And when we say a lizard man, the way that the boy describes, because there's a police report on this, he basically says that this giant man, about 6 feet tall, okay, he had red eyes, he had green scaly skin, long black claws, he had 3 fingers. It was specifically 3 fingers. Like I said, 6, 7 feet tall. And he literally just gets like make a couple bolts on the tire. He didn't even finish the tire. Like he said, literally had 2 bolts, 2 nuts on there, and most tires have 4 or 5 lug nuts on the tire. So he freaks out and he jumps in the car, but this lizard man jumps on top of the car, basically starts looking through the windshield. This kid is freaking out. I couldn't even imagine being a senior in high school and having this happen to me. And it completely rips the mirror off. Then it takes its claws and sticks it right into the roof and starts trying to pull the metal off the car. And it's strong because it's pulling chunks off of it. It's bending the actual metal back like a tin can, like the way you would peel a can of soup. This is the way the kid described it. He said like it was peeling a can of soup, and it was just peeling it right off like it was nothing to it. Okay. So he punches it, right? And this thing like hops off of it, falls off of it, and he goes straight to the police officers, right? And so he's hysterical, and the police officer was like, what's going on? And he was like, I was attacked by some lizard creature. And they're like, are you high? Are you drunk? Because it's a high school kid. Why are you out at 2, 3 in the morning, on a Friday night? What are you doing out here? Anyways, so what ends up happening is the police are like, okay, we don't believe you. And so what ends up happening is the kid actually says, well, you don't believe me? Come out to the car right now. So the cops go out to this kid's car, right? And they were like, oh my gosh. They first think it's a prank, but then they start seeing the claw marks, the fact that his mirror is completely ripped off. There are deep scrapes all along this bumper, along the roof. The roof is peeled back like a tin can. And they start taking pictures of it and they document it. And this is how we know about this case, because the cops are like, man, I don't think this kid's lying. Because when you become a police officer, you start to see when people are just like BSing you and they're just straight telling you lies. But the sheer terror of this kid's, like, he had straight up PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. And I would too. I mean, literally, you're at, in the middle of a swamp and this giant lizard creature comes out of nowhere and literally almost kills and attacks you. Now, here's the crazy part about this Bishopville story. This is not a one-off kind of thing. This continues on for several weeks. So 2 weeks later, the same area of Skateboard Swamp, now we have vandalism. So they call it for vandalism. The cops show up, and again, another car had been attacked in the night. Basically, it had ripped the bumper and the antenna off this car. Like, it literally like grabbed onto the bumper and pulled the bumper off the car. Okay. Now, like, oh, well, okay, well, maybe it is again. Now, here's the point that it continues on is that there's more and more cases. So now we're having multiple cases of this lizard type creature coming out of Skateboard Swamp. The whole summer, it gets extremely bad. People are getting their cars tore up. People are seeing it driving down the road at late night. People are finding footprints. The police find footprints, three-toed tracks left behind in the swamp and the mud. If you actually go to Bishopville, they actually have a museum to this lizard man creature, and they actually cast the prints of this three-toed creature. All right. And it gets to the point where they start saying, you know what, we might, this is over our heads. Like, clearly there's something out there. There's clearly something attacking people here in South Carolina. So they decide, well, maybe we should call the FBI. And oftentimes when you call the FBI, it tends not to end well in your favor. And that's just your personal advice from Chairman Nemo, DJ Nemo. Probably not a good idea. You know, it may not always work out in your favor. It could, but most of the time it probably won't. So anyways, so it continues to go on this way for like the next 10 years, 10 to 20 years, constant attacks of vandalism, people seeing it on the road, people saying it ran next to their car and like grabbed onto their car and pulled a mirror off, pulled an antenna off. It punched the window, like all sorts of crazy things. But it really gets crazy in 1998. And in 1998, we see it attack again. And now this time it's really getting out, because now it's continuing on where it basically this woman was in the car and it punched through the, like, it hopped in the car just like the kid. But she tried to drive away and it hung on the car. The other incidences, other than the first kid, where he was getting the car peeled back, the rest of the incidents were like, you know, people had their car just wrecked in the night, or people saw it on the road and it ran next to the car and tried to get in the car. In this case in 98, this woman was in her car and it hopped on the hood and she gassed it and it literally punched through the windshield. Okay. And then there was blood on it. Okay. Which was crazy. Not the woman's blood, but clearly blood from this creature. What makes it interesting is that this blood type thing was like, is black. Okay. It was like oil, and it smelled really bad. The way the woman describes it in the police report, because it actually goes on the news, this particular case where it was hanging on the car and it punched through the windshield, and it cut itself and bled through the glass. Basically, you know, she said it smelled like a snake. If you ever had a snake or an iguana or some other reptile type creature, basically they have a kind of funk to them. That's the best way I could describe it. I had a friend who had a bearded dragon and it just has a funk to it. Okay. If you've ever brown, go to next time you're at PetSmart, go over where the frogs and iguanas and the snakes are, and you could just smell. They have a certain kind of smell to them. Okay. And like, this was documented on the news. Now, the crazy part about it is in 2015, there actually is possibly a picture, and I'm going to see if I can try to find and post that picture on this podcast so you can take a look at what we're talking about when we talk about this lizard man. But it's become a major thing in this small town. And this small town, rather than use this tragedy as like, oh no, we should go out there and kill this thing, they turned it around into a tourism opportunity, because again, they're a small town, and this becomes like a very hot spot for cryptid researchers. So people that are into like Bigfoot and Dogman and Mothman's another big one that people go to West Virginia to go see the Mothman Museum. But in this particular case, there are always a lot of the hardcore people will go to Bishopville, South Carolina, to go see the Lizard Man Museum. And actually, what's interesting too is if you want to have a fun laugh too, there's actually a button museum there too. It's a guy named the Button King. Go look that guy up, the Button King, South Carolina. Just look him up. He's got a YouTube channel. He basically just collects buttons from all the world. He's a trip. He's a character too. But back to this. So that was the first sighting of this lizard type creature, as in South Carolina. Now, as I said before, this creature has been sighted throughout the world. We're going to bring a sighting a little bit closer home. And that deals with sightings here in Arizona. Now, there have been a lot of sightings in Arizona of lizard type creatures. Now, unlike the other one where he was more green, people start seeing a like brownish, um, camel, almost camel, like a camel level green and army green, but more brown. And the reptilian is more like it's a different face than compared to the Bishopville lizard person. Okay. But basically, this actually happens recently. This happened in 2014. Now, there have been other sightings in Arizona, but this one was documented by multiple people. And the reason why it's documented by multiple people is because there was something called the Old Pueblo race in Tucson, Arizona. And so people are on a biking race, throughout the desert on a 17-mile trail. Okay. And when you're in a race, there's a lot of people. Well, several group of cyclists were riding their mountain bike through the desert to try to win this race. And there's a guy, his name was G. Johnson. I don't think it gives his full name. But Mr. Johnson, basically, he's on this racetrack, and he's like, I don't want to have to stop anywhere. And while they're going, they see this like basically 6 foot tall, very skinny, lizard type man kind of just walking through the desert. And he said they walked weird. The way he described it is kind of like how, if you've ever seen monkeys walk and they walk all weird with that kind of like stride, basically that's what it says. He says it appears as is like this weird, it didn't walk right because humans don't walk this way, kind of like a little shimmy to it. Now, what's crazy is like, okay, well, maybe this guy's dehydrated because, it is a desert. He's in a race. There's not a lot of water. But here's the thing is that other people saw this. So other people stop and they see this thing. Okay. And what's crazy about it is that the thing sees them. And then once it sees them, it kind of skimmies over kind of by a rock and kind of ducked down like it knew something was going on. At that point, they realized it was really unsettling. So they got a really evil, creepy feeling with these lizard type creatures. And that's the thing with all these lizard type creatures, unlike people who have reported Bigfoot as being friendly, and just kind of curious more than anything else, unlike the Dogman, where all sightings of the Dogman are straight up terrifying and intimidating. This lizard man creature is the exact same thing. It puts fear and dread in people. And these writers, I think there was about 4 of them, they freak out once it ducks down. They realize that they might be in danger, and they take off. Okay. And they're freaking out the whole time. And that's the whole thing they could talk about. Like, they don't even care about the race anymore. They get to the end, everyone's like, yay, you completed the race. And they're like, no, you have to call the police. There's something out there. And they start telling them about it, about this lizard man type creature. And they didn't know what it was. They said, was it an alien? That maybe it was a chupacabra. Because now, which is interesting about the chupacabra, because we know there are 2 different types of chupacabra. There's the one that's currently in the United States, which is kind of like it looks like a bald, mangy coyote that's blue or black with like skin, and it only drinks blood. It has like blue, like almost baby blue eyes. But they're comparing it more to the chupacabra sightings out of Puerto Rico. Now, we'll talk about specifically about the chupacabra on another episode. But basically, the chupacabra was like an alien type government experiment gone wrong, because there's a lot of government bases in Puerto Rico. And allegedly, as we always say on South Side Paranormal, allegedly, in air quotes, that there's experiments going on this base. And they think that maybe this was one of those experiments, that there's an underground base in Arizona. Maybe it got out. Maybe it's Stanley left behind. All I could say is that this was a documented sighting. This is in the newspapers. You can look it up. I'm looking at the article right now, Tucson Weekly. You could pull it up. Just put Lizard Man Tucson. But there are other sightings in Arizona. People have seen them down by Yuma. People have seen over by Buckeye. People have seen these creatures in Arizona, but like an actual documented case that multiple people saw because they were in a bike race, so the news was there. It's an interesting story to take down and read it and investigate yourself, because as we always say on Southside Paranormal, do your own research. If you think that anything that I'm saying is not backed. I always do my research. I always try to back up my points. I always try to give you the best factual, true information that I have from my research, my knowledge, my experience in the topics of the paranormal and other mysterious creatures and phenomena. Which brings us to the final story of tonight. And that deals with Los Angeles. Now you're like, well, there's already a bunch of weird lizard people in Los Angeles, and I would tend to agree with you. As we like to say before, like, South Side Paranormal is an Arizona themed podcast, and so sometimes Arizona and California people, we don't necessarily get along. We have two different wavelengths, but overall, I think there's a lot of really great people in California. Okay. There's a lot of people that I know personally from California they're wonderful people. They always change my mindset. So shout out to them. I know, because I already know they're listening. They're like, what? They're hating on the California people. No, we got mad love for you. And we appreciate your love and support in the podcast. So let's talk about this LA story. So this happens in 1933 in California. You have to remember, in California, 1933, we have Los Angeles booming. It's a big city. You have Hollywood going. This is the golden age of Hollywood. Movies are being made. People are moving out to California. It's the land of opportunity. Okay. Now, what ends up happening is that there's a guy who's a researcher. His name was Chief Greenleaf. And he was like a Native American tribesman, a medicine man. And he ends up befriending this mining engineer. This guy's name was George Warren Schufelt. Okay. And they start talking about like just mysterious things, California in general. And he tells them that possibly there are a giant community of lizard people living under the entire city of Los Angeles through the sewer system, under these massive catacomb tunnels under current Los Angeles right now. Now, before you think this is absolutely crazy, let me continue on. Now, this case is actually documented in the Los Angeles Times. If you go to the Los Angeles Times and search up the archives, put in this guy's name, George Warren Schufelt, 1933. Basically, he starts going and doing research. He starts going to the libraries. And remember, this guy's a mining engineer, so he knows how to like mine through tunnels, mine through barricades, and all sorts of things. So they start exploring. So him and this Native American guy start exploring all throughout the sewer systems, and they find different clues and different things that they said maybe there is something to this. Now, what ends up crazy is that he starts documenting it. Okay. And he basically uses his own homemade, I guess, X-ray machine is what he calls it, but really it's like a ground penetrating radar. And he starts mapping all of Los Angeles underneath these sewers. And he determines that there's these giant catacombs underneath the city where these lizard things are coming up with. And he starts getting financing because people start getting curious. And he goes all up and down, all under Broadway Road, which is like a major street in California. And he basically digs like all over the place. Okay. And he digs about 1,000 feet down. And at this time, like, he's going there and exploring, finding all these little tunnels and offshoots. Cause like, why would all this stuff exist? Like, okay, I understand there's a sewer in LA, but why is he finding all these other tunnels? And he was convinced that these lizard people sightings and people in Los Angeles are all connected, that all these lizard things are coming out of these catacombs. Now, before you think like, well, this guy's just on a crazy quest and everything like that, once he starts digging down there in about 1935, people start this, I guess this pissed the lizard people under Los Angeles off, because then we start seeing multiple sightings. And you can look into the Los Angeles Times because there's sightings of all these lizard people, of them popping out of the sewer, scaring people in the neighborhoods, grabbing people's dogs and pulling it back in the drain. So whatever he was doing upset whatever was down there, because we see multiple sightings. And think about how big of a city Los Angeles is, right? And this is in 1933. Even then it was big. But you start seeing all these different sightings of this lizard type creatures coming up and like spooking people. And then again, it's the same phenomena and the same theory that people keep reporting, that these lizard creatures, when they do see them, absolutely terrify them, absolutely put them at on edge, scares them. They're eating their pets, all sorts of crazy things. I mean, it turns into an absolute panic hysteria throughout the 1940s. Okay. Now, what's crazy is this guy starts to run out of money because he wants to keep exploring. He's fully convinced that he found the hive, and he wanted to go down there and document it. Because remember, all this really didn't start happening till he had actually started digging down there. So once he started digging down there, then these sightings went through the absolute roof. Absolute roof. Okay. Now, what's crazy is that this brings a lot of attention to this guy. And remember, this guy's an actual mining engineer. People start to ruin his life. And this is what brings me to kind of conclusion that, was there possibly something to this? They start ruining this guy's life. Okay. Science society say this guy's crazy. We fired him. He doesn't know what he's talking about. And they basically just ruin his reputation. That would be like if you were, a doctor, and you might be finding the cure for cancer, but no one wants the cure for cancer to get out. So they start labeling you crazy. Oh, this person's crazy. They don't know what they're doing. They're just wasting investors' money. It ruins your reputation. Even if you 100% found the cure, it wouldn't matter because no one would believe you. And that's what they did to this guy. There was no internet in 1957. There was no internet in the 30s. Okay. There was none of that. So people basically, all they had, there was no TV. So all they had was the radio and the newspaper and magazines. So when the story starts leaking out, the press really start getting hushed. And so there are reports that hire people up, start telling these newspapers, we don't care that there's lizard stories going on. You're not going to print it anymore. And they start to ruin this guy, Schufeld's reputation, and they ruin his. So he's becomes a laughing stock out of Los Angeles. Okay. And this guy actually has a documented map. I'm going to try to see if I can post a picture of the map from the archives that I found from what he had documented under Los Angeles. Now it gets to the point where by the 50s, people like saying, oh, this never happened. He didn't, he needs to pay us back. We're not seeing any returns. We don't see any like lizard people. We don't see gold. We don't see anything that you basically wasted our money. And they just end up ruining this guy. Okay. And unfortunately for him, he passes away. And because it wrecked his life. He lost everything. He lost friends. He lost his wife. He lost his everything because he was convinced it was right. And he was safe. Like he was so close. If he just had a little bit more money and a little bit more support from the city of Los Angeles, he could have found out where all this stuff was happening. Okay. Now he was also convinced that a lot of the earthquake issues were related to these lizard people, that they blamed it on the San Andreas fault. But if you actually look at his map, and how the fact all these sightings start popping up, all these sightings line up to the map where the tunnels happen, where people are seeing them, where people lost pets. It came out of the sewer, grabbed their dog, and then went back in the sewer. It all lines up to everything in his map. So maybe this guy wasn't crazy. And I feel bad because this dude was like out there telling the truth in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. And he ends up dying broke and alone in 1957. And just sad to me that this guy was really super based. He was super ahead of his time. He knew all that stuff. He was documenting it. And clearly there was some kind of phenomena happening. And the fact that the LA Times completely covered this story up, completely shut this guy down and ruined his reputation in his life. This guy was a scientist. He was a mining engineer. He knew exactly what he was doing. You know how much schooling you have to be a mining engineer? You know how smart you have to be to understand science, physics, load, understanding how to build a mine shaft, supported that there's oxygen, there's ventilation. There's so much math involved in this. Okay. Math, physics, geometry. I mean, that's just how it goes. And the fact that this guy like staked his reputation and lost it all trying to get the truth out. And this is my final point for this evening. Now he's like, oh, well, maybe this guy was just crazy. Maybe he was full of it. In 2016, there was a sighting in Apple Valley, California. So people who are like my Barstow people, like, hey, I know where Barstow is. It's the way to Vegas. So when you go from Los Angeles to Vegas, there's Barstow and Apple Valley. Okay. In Apple Valley, California, there was a woman that had seen one of these creatures come out of her storm drain, come out of the storm drain, and basically like was peeping on her. It was in the closet in her house, and it would stare at her getting dressed, all sorts of horrible, disgusting things. It's, if you want to watch on Destination America, Monsters and Mysteries, they actually document this case. And basically it ruined this woman's life, where so much where she moved, and she's not like, I'm never going back to California ever again. She like moved to Nevada. But what was crazy about this was that like, you know, are the tunnels out there now? Are they all the way out? Because, you know, Barstow and Apple Valley are not that far from LA, maybe an hour and a half, maybe. They're not that far. And so, you know, is there some truth to this guy? And they kind of squashed it all down. The fact that we're still seeing modern sightings in California happening out there. You know, there was another case of in that same area in Barstow where a woman was out walking her dog, and these creatures started coming out of the sewers again, and they were trying to get to the dog. She freaks out, just screaming. The husband who was upstairs in the apartment came down with like a golf club and was trying to fight them off. And then he hit one with the golf club, and it hissed at him like, and when it hissed, it wasn't just one that popped out of the sewer, about 5 more. What was crazy is that this guy freaked out and hopped into the bed of his like work truck, and he was like standing on top of the roof of the truck, and he was just trying to use the golf club to hit these creatures. What ends up finally turning it away is that, you know, this woman's screaming hysterically. So like neighbors called the cops. So the cops show up, you know, they the lights are going, all that. They all go running right back into the sewer. But it's just crazy to me is that, was this guy in the 30s and 40s onto something? And now we're seeing modern sightings of it in Apple Valley, in Barstow, in that area between Los Angeles and Las Vegas. They're seeing signs out there. Did all those creatures get freaked out and there's something happened in Los Angeles? They had to move and they just tunneled all the way there. It's not that far away. It's not that impossible to think that something like that could happen. Okay. But that's just something interesting to think about. There's a lot more different other richer we can go down, and we just, unfortunately, we just don't have the time in tonight's episode. But I hope you learned something today. And like I said, go do your own research. And we're so happy that you're joining us. Season 3 is the best season of all. We're taking all your compliments and all your advice and feedback, and we're making this podcast better. We're going to bring on special guests this season. We're going to have a midway awesome multi-part story in season 3 as the midway point before the season finale. But we're having so many guests this year, so we're definitely appreciate you. We appreciate your love and support of our channel. Again, like, share, and subscribe. And as we always say, be safe, be well, and we'll see you on the dark side of the mountain.